Have you ever harvested something from your garden only to find that it was ruined by some hidden pests? That's exactly what happened to my sweet potatoes. Root knot nematodes wreaked havoc underground. But it's not just about what happened to that crop. It's about what's lurking in my soil and how that's going to affect what I'm going to plant next. In this video, I'll share the surprising results of a soil nematode test, my new plan to battle those microscopic invaders, and some options for you to use if nematodes are threatening your garden. Hey guys, my name's Jen and I'm here in Zone 10A, Melbourne, Florida. On this channel, I'm sharing my journey of learning how to grow food in my suburban backyard. My goal is to eventually lean towards teaching people how to grow food in their backyard, but since I'm only 2.5 years in, I'm still doing a lot of learning myself. In this video, I'll be sharing my journey with discovering root knot nematodes in my raised bed garden and how I figured out what to do about them. Let's get into it. About 6 months ago, I planted sweet potato slips in a raised bed in my backyard. I let them grow all summer long for a total of about 5 months. In this video right here, you can see the devastation that I felt when I harvested those sweet potatoes and saw root knot nematode lesions all over them. The lesions look like bumps all over the sweet potato. Now, in the comments of that video, some of you asked, what's the big deal? Can't you just cut it off and eat around it? The answer is yes, I definitely can. I just haven't yet because they've been curing in my pantry for the last 2 weeks. The bigger deal about discovering root knot nematodes in my garden is what it means for all the plants I want to plant in fall. Root knot nematodes are soil-borne pests that affect almost every crop you want to grow, so I've got to get the population under control. Root knot nematodes are very common in Florida soil, so if you've been gardening for a long time in Florida, there's a good chance you've encountered them. Root knot nematodes are microscopic worms that feed by piercing the root of edible crops. They also reproduce really rapidly. And by rapidly, I mean there's a new generation every 3 weeks. So it makes sense that I found significant damage on a crop that stayed in the raised bed for 5 months. The good thing about root knot nematodes is that they only move a couple inches or maybe a couple feet in either direction. In a commercial operation, one of the most common ways they're spread is by soil sticking to tractor tires. However, in a home garden, they usually spread by infected transplants or unsterile tools. There's actually a whole lot of nematodes in the soil and most of them are beneficial. Some of these beneficial nematodes actually will reduce the population of the plant parasitic nematodes like root knot nematodes. It can be really hard to diagnose a root knot nematode problem in the middle of a growing season because most of that damage is happening underground. When the root knot nematodes pierce the roots, they actually create these galls on the roots. Here's a clip of a shishito pepper plant that I pulled from the same raised bed that shows galls on the roots. Think of a drinking straw. When you order one of those Starbucks pink drinks with the freeze-dried strawberries in it and one of those strawberries gets stuck in the straw, it's really hard to get the drink out of the straw, right? The root knot nematode galls on the roots of plants operates basically the same way. It prevents the plant from being able to effectively soak up water and nutrients. So some of the above ground symptoms you're going to start seeing once you have galls on the roots include stunted growth, yellowing leaves, and decreased yields. Now, if there is a nutrient deficiency in your soil and it's time to add more organic matter in there, you're going to see the exact same symptoms, right? Stunted growth, yellowing leaves, and decreased yields. If you were to go through that and add your nutrients back into the soil and the condition of the plant does not improve, you're probably looking at a root knot nematode problem. So when I shared that video of my initial discovery of the root knot nematode damage on my sweet potatoes, I got so many comments and they were all so helpful. Some people had great ideas about how to deal with them, and some of you were kind of in the same place as me where you had just discovered a root knot nematode problem. So that video was about 2.5 weeks ago. And as soon as I published that video, I started doing tons of research online and I came across this really helpful YouTube video from the University of Florida. I'll put a link right up here to that video if you're interested in watching it, and I recommend starting at the chapter for nematode management in coal crops, which starts at timestamp 2142. So in that video, there's a professor of nematology speaking about the impact of root knot nematodes on commercial production in the state of Florida, and he also talks about how to manage them. So from that video, I have learned that there are 5 key pillars to nematode management. Number 1, crop rotation, including cover cropping. Number 2, cultivar choice, meaning plant-resistant varieties wherever possible. Number 3, soil management. Number 4, targeted control like nematicides. And number 5, monitoring. Now, I've read countless articles and forums and watched so many YouTube videos on the subject of root knot nematodes. And some of the options available seem really drastic and some of them seem really expensive. So the first thing I wanted to do was figure out how bad my problem really was. There is a publication from the University of Florida. It's publication number ENY-024, Nematode Management in Coal Crops. It was in this article that I discovered the IFAS Nematode Assay Lab. I'll put a link to this publication in the description box below. What I found out is that you can actually take a soil sample from your own garden, send it to the Nematode Assay Lab in Gainesville, Florida, and they'll look under a microscope at your soil sample and give you quantitative data about what type of nematode problem you have, the population density of that nematode, and some recommendations about how to treat it. So it seemed to me like this is exactly what I needed. So naturally, I did the soil sampling and I sent it off to UF. Let's cut to a clip and I'll share how I did the soil sampling. It recommends taking 8 to 12 samples. So I'm probably gonna lean towards 12 because I've got a long raised bed here. It's 21 feet long. And the way they say to take the samples is to reach down, and for the soil, you're going to want to go at least 6 inches deep, and you can just take a handful and put it in a Ziploc bag. Now, they're able to give you a lot more information if you also put about 1 to 2 cups worth of roots in the bag. So first I'm going to start with the soil, and then I'll go back and try to find 1 to 2 cups worth of roots to submit as well. They also said to make sure you don't give them dry soil. Make sure it's a little bit wet. Okay, so I think I've got my sample of soil. They say it should be about a pint, taken from several different spots in the raised bed, which is what I did. I think it's a little more than a pint, but that's okay. And for roots, they say 1 to 2 cups of roots. I think that's good. I'm just going to put them, they say to put it in the same bag as the soil. And then there's a form to fill out, and I need to mail this to them and pay, I think, $37 to get an analysis done. I got the results of the test a couple days ago, but I have to admit they're not what I expected. Let's take a look at the soil sample test results. So I harvested my sweet potatoes on August 29th. I collected the soil sample on September 5th. The lab received the soil on September 10th, and the results were provided to me on September 17th. The lab confirmed the nematode type is root knot, but they also determined that the levels were below population levels believed to be damaging to the crop indicated, which was sweet potatoes. Now I can clearly see lesions all over the sweet potatoes, and I can see galls on the roots of a shishito pepper plant that I pulled. So needless to say, I was very surprised at the result. But the more I think about it, the more I can imagine why the results came back that way. It's possible that since I harvested my sweet potatoes about a week prior to submitting a sample, and the soil was left fallow for that time, some root knot nematodes could have died before I took that soil sample. I'm curious if future sampling might give me different results if I sample right before harvesting. So this time around, I may have screwed up the sampling, but I can't change any of that after the fact. And although I'm skeptical of the result I got, I will base my management plan on those test results. If you guys have ever done soil sampling and sent it to the UF Nematode Assay Lab, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Let me know if you did something different with the sampling, and I'm really curious if you got different recommendations. Now it's time to talk through my new battle plan. I'm going to base this part of the conversation around the 5 pillars of nematode management. Within each pillar, I'll share what I'm doing about it, and I'll also share some additional options that you may choose to use in your garden. Pillar number 1 is crop rotation. Crop rotation is definitely something that I'm going to be doing. Over the past year, the infected raised bed has had eggplant, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, and peppers in it. So I'm probably going to avoid all 4 of those for about a year. Instead, I'm going to choose some fast-maturing brassicas, some fresh herbs, flowers, lima beans, and daikon radishes. Interplanting with French marigolds was also something that came up a lot, but it was really hard to understand if it actually worked or not. And actually, I had French marigolds planted with my sweet potatoes the entire time they were growing. Now, it obviously didn't prevent anything for me, but since I always plant flowers in my raised bed, I'm going to choose to go with a French marigold in that raised bed, and at the end of the season, I'll chop and drop the leaves directly in that raised bed so I can get the benefits of a cover crop. Now, I also saw a ton of comments in my last video about the use of cover crops. Specifically, French marigolds and Kodiak brown mustard came up a lot. A lot of the research on the topic actually points to sorghum, Sudangrass, or Sunnhemp, but those have a negative side effect of actually promoting the population of some other plant parasitic nematodes. Regardless of the cover crop, I'm choosing not to do it right now. And that's because the results of my soil test said the root knot nematode population is not high enough to be damaging, so I don't feel the need to delay my fall plantings to allow time for a cover crop. I also want to point out that you should be selective about the variety of French marigold that you choose. In the description box below, I'll put a link to IFAS Publication ENY-056, Marigolds for Nematode Management. Table 1 of that document shows different marigold varieties and their resistance to nematodes. One example of a variety that I found readily available was the Bonita variety of French marigold that's resistant to all 3 types of root knot nematodes. I'll put a link in the description box below where you can find those seeds. I'm going to get mine from Eden Brothers. Pillar number 2 is Cultivar Selection. Now this one, it sounds so great. If you could just plant resistant varieties, everything would be fine, right? You wouldn't have any host plants for the nematodes, their population would decrease, and you wouldn't have any issues with yields in your garden. There's one major problem to that thought process though. There's really not very many root knot nematode resistant varieties. The one crop I found with a lot of information on it is actually tomatoes. Varieties like Sanibel, Daytona, and Mariana have what's called the MI gene, which is actually what gives them its resistance to root knot nematodes. These are readily available. I'll put links in the description box below if you're interested in buying those cultivars. For bell peppers, the Carolina Wonder variety that you can buy online from Southern Exposure Seed Exchange was bred specifically for nematode resistance. Another crop where I found a resistant cultivar was lima beans. I'm going to buy these ones. These are called the Nemagreen lima beans, which were specifically bred for their RKN resistance. And honestly, that's about all I could find for crops that were specifically bred for their RKN resistance. If you found any on your own, I would love to hear about that in the comments below. Now, since we don't have a plethora of options to choose from for root knot nematode resistant cultivars of all of the crops that we love, I'm going to choose what crops to plant loosely based on the research and also just a little bit of practicality and thoughts of my own. For example, I'm going to choose fast maturing brassicas. So something like arugula and kale that's reaching maturity within 60 to 90 days in the raised bed. If I start those from seed in a seed starting cell and then I transplant them 1 month into the garden, that's very little time they're actually in the garden, which means very little time for root knot nematodes to pierce the root and multiply. That's going to be my approach to choosing some edible crops. If you want to follow along, I'll be updating on this channel exactly how well those crops are doing throughout the fall season. For the 3rd pillar of my nematode management plan, we're talking about soil management. One of my goals of dealing with these root knot nematodes is to maintain or even improve the health of my soil. Solarization is definitely a tactic that some people use to manage root knot nematodes, but because solarization basically kills everything in the soil, I'm going to choose not to do any solarization. One of the most popular management techniques has to do with crab meal. The way crab meal works to fight off root knot nematodes is actually by increasing the populations of the microbes in the soil that enjoy chitin. And those beneficial microorganisms will reduce the population of the root knot nematodes. It's pretty widely accepted that crab meal helps with a root knot nematode problem in your garden. However, there's still a question about how to apply it. For heavy infestations, most people will fertilize with crab meal at the same time as planting, right where the transplant is going in the garden. However, because my test results actually say that my root knot nematode population is not that damaging, I'm going to just do a broad application of crab meal throughout my entire raised bed. The raised bed is about 50 square feet of garden space, so I'm going to use about 2.5 pounds of crab meal. I also read that liquid seaweed fertilizer at the time of planting can help deter the root knot nematodes. So what I'm going to do at the time of planting is fertilize with Maxicrop liquid seaweed. I'll put a link in the description box below if you're interested in that product. I also need to add 2 to 3 inches of organic compost just to maintain the soil level in my raised bed and add some nutrient density. The fourth pillar in a nematode management plan is targeted control, and by that we mean nematicides. They can come in the form of fumigants, non-fumigants, and biological nematicides. Soil fumigants are really not a good option for a backyard gardener. First of all, there's all kinds of certifications and training that you need to even apply it, and then there's a lot of potential damage to surrounding areas, so we're not even going to go there. The next option is a non-fumigant nematicide. Those can be chemical or non-chemical, and they're usually applied with drip irrigation. Now, my guess is you and I are both looking for a more natural option than fumigants or non-fumigant nematicides, right? There's biological options as well. Biological options include those that use bacteria, fungus, and even essential oils to treat for root knot nematodes. Some of these could actually be a really good option for a backyard gardener who has a big root knot nematode problem. I've read a little bit about the use of abamectin. Abamectin is a natural fermentation product of a bacteria. I'm not even gonna attempt to say the scientific name of that bacteria, but I'll put a link in the description box below to 2 off-the-shelf products that contain abamectin as the active ingredient. Those are Turvigo and Fervid. The brand Monterey also has an OMRI-listed product that's called Nematode Control. If your interest was piqued at essential oils, I'm right there with you. They recommend using thyme oil, mustard oil, and even sesame oil to help discourage the populations of root knot nematodes. The way that they apply this is usually emulsifying those oils with something like a pure Castile soap and applying it to your raised bed. I've also heard about people buying beneficial nematodes and adding those directly into the garden in hopes that those will keep the plant parasitic nematode populations down. Although I will say it seems like some people say it works and some people say it doesn't, so you can try it if you want. I think I'm just going to save the money and not try it at this time. So these biological nematicides sound intriguing, but I'm just not at the point where I want to try any of those. I'm going to hold back and see if the problem gets worse and then reach for one of those. The fifth pillar of nematode management is monitoring. This is where it's going to get interesting. See how I just laid out an entire plan for my initial approach? It only makes sense to do some of those things if I'm also going to take another soil sample towards the end of my fall planting season, send it back to the lab, get new results, and see if my plan needs to be adjusted in any way. This is something that I'm probably going to have to continuously do until I feel like I've got a handle on how to manage the root knot nematodes. I will continuously add videos to my root knot nematode playlist, so hit that subscribe button and follow along. Okay, that was a lot of talking. Let's simplify it down to a few bullet points and I'll recap my nematode management plan. Number 1, rotate crops by planting daikon radishes, brassicas, and lima beans. Number 2, plant RKN resistant cultivars like Nemagreen lima beans and fast maturing brassica plants. Number 3, amend the soil with lots of organic compost, crab meal, and fertilize with liquid seaweed at the time of planting. Number 4, at this time I will not be using any nematicides. Number 5, periodically submit soil samples and adjust my management plan as needed. Be sure to like this video if you guys found it helpful, and I'll see you next time.